All right, from Wall Street and Silicon Valley to the nation's capital we go.
And to another most read story on the Bloomberg today. It's about the pushback against Elon Musk's demand that more than 2 million federal employees defend their work. What's interesting is where the resistance is coming from, Carol, and that's other powerful figures in the Trump administration. It's a sign that the billionaire's brash approach to overhauling the government, it's creating a little bit of division, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I wouldn't throw in the towel yet that, something maybe bigger is going on. But let's find out what's going on. We turn to Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst. He is Nathan Dean. He's out there in our Washington, D.C. News Bureau for Bloomberg News. Nathan, good to have you here. Now, first of all, backdrop. This relates to some emails, right, that went out over the weekend, I think on Saturday. Tell us a little bit about what went out, what was required. What do we know?
Yeah, so this email came out from the DOGE, obviously from the Office of Personnel and Management. This email went to all the federal workers, essentially said, reply back in 5 bullets. Tell us what you did last week. But then Elon Musk went on X later and said, look, failure to reply to this means that you're just going to resign or would be taken as an act of resignation. Now, President Trump walked that back just a little bit in his remarks just about an hour ago with President Macron in the Oval Office. But he said it was still a good idea to send this email out because they wanted to know who was working and who was not. But the pushback came from several of the agencies like the FBI, the the Department of Homeland Security, where they said either wait for further guidance or in the Department of Homeland Security's case, we're going to hand that email on your behalf. So I don't think this means that, DOGE is going to be going one by one, meaning we're going to fire people later this week, but rather it was an exercise, I think, to get the federal workforce's attention and certainly put them on guard that, the DOGE office or committee or whatever you discuss it as, is going to be going through with a fine-tooth comb and trying to find more areas to cut. So this story is certainly going to continue to develop over the next few weeks.
Do we see the agencies, the departments that have pushed back and said, wait a second, take a step back, don't worry about doing this right now? Is that for potential national security reasons, or can it be construed as something else?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, certainly national security reasons are important. There was the email said, don't reply with classified or confidential information, and President Trump alluded to that in his Oval Office remarks. But also, I would just say that, there's a lot of unintended consequences that comes with this, mass firing, if you will, of the federal government workforce. We saw this happen with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Russ Vought, the director of the OMB, went in, announced that 95% of the CFPB employees would be leaving, and accidentally, or, as a byproduct of this, let go a couple of employees that are very, very important to the mortgage market, and subsequently had to go back and rehire those employees, get them back to do something what's called the APOR. It's very important to the mortgage rates. So as we move forward, we're going to still continue to see this play out. The challenge for those of us in the markets are going to be is how to try and predict those unintended consequences and see if we can figure out a way to actually minimize the impact to companies and sectors in the investment portfolios we cover.
All right, but I talked about pushback in the introduction, and this has to do with some of the heads of some of the various administrations. Kash Patel, first day in office, right? So what might have been interim or, substitute leaders of groups while people were being confirmed, well, now those people have been confirmed and they're taking over. So there is some pushback about, hey, whoa, let's slow this down a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, these cabinet officials and these agency heads certainly do not want Elon Musk going in there and playing with their own personnel and their own strategy. I mean, most of these individuals, when they took to these positions, they took them under the idea that they were going to be the one leading this. So I certainly think there's going to be friction there. And this is what we'd coined the soap opera portion of the Trump presidency because, President Trump isn't somebody who brings in a cabinet full of people that are going to agree. He brings in people that will eventually disagree, and these disagreements will take place. But ultimately, it's President Trump that's going to make the end game discussion here. The other thing, pushback we're starting to see is a little bit from the Republican side in Capitol Hill. There's been some town halls recently. One happened down in Georgia, for example, where constituents were beginning to say, we're not comfortable with the DOGE operating apparatus here because 80% of the federal workforce is outside of the district area. And so when you start to see cuts happening in Philadelphia or in Atlanta, there's a lot of local politicians that are going to start getting dragged into the fold here, not at the point where I think it's going to change any way of congressional outlook in terms of reconciliation, but with midterm elections starting to loom, only 18 months from now, you're certainly going to see a lot more pressure on the Republican Party for these cuts.
Nathan, I know there are people watching or listening right now who are saying it takes 20 seconds literally to come up with 5 things that I did last week. This is not a big ask for federal employees. It's a very easy thing to do. Indeed, that's basically what Elon Musk was saying over the last 36 hours on X. What say you to them?
I would just say it's not how the federal government is used to operating. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of rules out there. We've heard, a lot of rules where you could be traveling, you could be on business. The 2-day deadline, you get the email on Sunday and you have to respond by Monday at midnight. But, certainly wherever this is going, it's going to eventually end up in the courts because, the president is going to make decisions to shrink the federal government. He's been quite clear on that. These cuts are going to continue, and eventually they're going to go to the courts, and the courts are going to decide, can you do this or can you not? So, there's a lot of change in terms of mindset. The president has a lot of broad authority to do what's within the executive branch, but ultimately the courts are going to be the ones to decide if he can do this or not.
Nathan, you're there in the nation's capital. Not everybody is. We do watch certainly feeds and things on social and, various cable and networking programming, our own programming. What is going in and around the Capitol? I look at buildings where they're, no longer the names of various departments are there, the CFPB, for example, and some other administrations, or I should say offices within the administration. Are there protests? Like, what can you tell us that maybe is not being picked up on?
Yeah, so there's minor protests,
okay.
I would say both between, government workers and also Democratic politicians. There was a protest outside the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There was another one over outside USAID. But I would say there's a lot of federal government workers who are just very anxious. For me, I was a banker in the financial crisis. It reminds me of 2008 when Lehman Brothers went under and you felt that anxiety on Wall Street or in the city of London. It feels very similar here in Washington, D.C. at the moment. But ultimately, there's not going to be much pushback on the president within the executive branch until we get this government funding fight, this potential shutdown on March 14th. That is when, if the Democrats want to fight back against DOGE, that is one of those areas that they're going to be able to do it because that is going to require a bipartisan support to keep the U.S. government operating past March 14th, or else we could have a lengthy shutdown.
Jamie Dimon, Nathan, was on CNBC a little earlier today. In an interview, he said he's got a wait-and-see attitude about DOGE and tariffs. He does say the U.S. government is inefficient and needs a lot of work. Is this, in general, the way you would characterize executives' approach to what's happening in Washington right now? Take a step back and let's see what happens?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody really wants to stick their neck out and incur the wrath of the bully pulpit, either from President Trump or from Elon Musk. If you remember President Trump's speech in Davos, he specifically called out Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, for its debanking policies, or at least what they perceive to be debanking policies. And so I think Wall Street instead is playing a long-term game here where they're saying, look, we're not going to get in the way of DOGE at the moment. We're not going to voice any opposition unless we get into a point where there's unintended consequences, where we need quick ramifications to that, or we're beginning to see what the outcome of deregulation and or this tax reform debate that's happening in Congress at the moment. So it's a long-term game plan. And so they're going to stay quiet for now.
All right, Nathan, let's just do this same time, same place tomorrow, okay? Just 24 hours, because, man, I feel like we'll get another update. Nathan